rent or not to rent? That is the question. All right, let's see it. This is the real story with Adam and Sherry. I'm Adam Hamalian,
And I'm Sherry Hutchens.
and this is where two real estate brokers with 35 years of experience talk about all things real estate in Contra Costa County. Hi, Sherry.
Hey, Adam, how are you today?
Well, I am, as I imagine a lot of people are, tired of election season already, and I think we still have 40 more days to go.
Yes. Yeah,
Uh,
they will
so
they will speed past though.
Yeah, supposedly. I mean, I imagine that the election cycle will be for the next presidential will begin as soon as this one is resolved. Of course, the good
Oh,
news is this might not be resolved for several months, but who knows?
exactly. I know. It's a little more interesting this year,
Y-
though, I think, than it has been in the past. I'm not sure why.
Yeah, it is a little bit more curious. So, well, with that kind of caveat, today's topic, which we'll get to in a sec, we're going to dip our toe into a little bit of politics, though we're going to stick to our lane and talk about a real estate proposition here in California, Prop 33.
Yep.
Before we do that, let's talk a little bit about the market in our area. So, did you pull some numbers about what kind of activity's been going on here in Contra Costa County?
Yeah, as you know, we track 10 cities for statistics to see what the market's doing. We're based in Lafayette. We sell mainly in the Walnut Creek area, and we look at well, I'm not going to list all of them because I probably can't do it in the right order, but during the previous week, there were 510 active single family homes. I'm not counting condos, just single families. And 40 of those were new listings that came on between September 15th and 21st. 62 went pending that week, and 54 actually closed escrow. So, according to Trend Graphics, one of the websites that we use to track numbers, it says that it's still a fairly active seller's market. So we have about a month and a half worth of inventory if all of those houses were going to continue to sell at the rate that they sold in the last week. So,
Yeah, that's interesting. I think kind of as a historical across the nation, like 3 months is kind of a standard assumption rate.
yeah.
But that's not really true for the Bay Area or California as a whole. So a month and a half sounds actually like there's enough inventory, but I'm guessing that the that inventory has some houses that are more challenging than others.
Well,
Um,
we've certainly experienced that when we're out looking at buyers. We had kind of six active buyers. One of them we put into contract, and the other five are looking. Um, and there's a lot of houses out there that I think it's safe to say nobody wants to buy,
yeah.
at least at the price they're listed at.
Yeah. Yeah. Sherry always likes to say price is always it's always price.
Oh, with
That,
price.
and that when a house gets to the right price, it'll sell. And
I love it when you quote me, by the way.
well, of course, when you're right. I mean, you're right all the
I,
time, but
I love being right. That's really what it is.
yeah, exactly. Right. All right. So you are right.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, it's always price. You know, the saying price, location, condition, it's always price.
I've never had anyone quote myself back to me before. Isn't that fascinating? For those of you who don't know, that's a When Harry Met Sally reference, which gets referenced all the time in our partnership.
Yeah. And we're gonna jump in a cab and drive off and leave the other one standing on the sidewalk any minute now.
Exactly. Well, whatever that means.
There's a certain age group that will have no clue what any of this means. So,
No, no, exactly.
but for those of you who know, you know.
That's right. And we're not having what she's having. All right. The the well, that's a little bit of the market update. Let's jump into our topic today because it's a pretty broad topic, and we're going to try and give some overview and then focus in on what this particular proposition is trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
And we will not tell you how to vote, but we'll give you an indication about what we think you might do because it's actually not perfectly clear. So in California, we have rent control, and there's some rent control laws that are at the state level, and then local areas, counties, and cities can have their own ordinances, and particularly onerous ones are in Oakland and Alameda. almost notoriously, the even to the rent control that's happening in San Francisco, which has a lot of complexity to it, and we're not going to opine on anything in San Francisco, um, although it is affected by this proposition.
And I'm going to jump in with a little bit of trivia and say that California is the only state in the union that has both state and local rent control. No other state has that except us.
Yeah, and that is not necessarily a good thing. I'm going to speak in favor briefly about rent control,
Mhm,
even as somebody who has owned some rental property. Um, I I I think that housing is obviously really important to all of us, and whether you have the capacity to own a home or rent a home, which is really you are buying temporarily the rights to live in that space.
mhm,
It is it's not Pavlov. What's the other Russian? The hierarchy of human needs. Anyway, the pyramid that's got like, physical needs are at the bottom. So
mhm.
like, food, shelter, that kind of thing is at the bottom
Yeah.
of the human needs category. It is just basic to what we need. And I think the rent control laws come into place with that in mind of saying that there are some human rights tied to where we're living and that landlords have to act justly when they're providing housing. Oh, and actually, I guess I need to correct that. We don't call them landlords anymore. Um,
Yes. Housing provider.
Housing provider or property owner. Uh,
Mhm,
and I have to admit that I've kind of been annoyed at that change over the last couple of years, along with some other vocabulary change. But as we were researching this particular proposition, I realized that there's actually some legal definitions around lords
mhm,
in English property law, which
mhm,
is part of the grandfather of U.S. property laws,
mhm.
and that lords actually specifically that title of somebody has a different kind of right as opposed to somebody who is the property owner. And so separating those two words out actually I've learned is important, even though it kind of bothers me because the way we use landlord has nothing to do with an English lord.
Absolutely.
Um, although I'd like to have a knight's outfit. Does it come with an armor? If I got a horse, could I like stable it at my house and like have a lance and like go up and down my street?
Now I know what to get you for your birthday.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
That's gonna
L-
be a pain in the butt wrapping that thing, though.
Lord Hamalian. Yeah. Anyway,
Exactly.
I
Yes.
got
Back to
sidetracked.
Proposition 33.
Oh yeah, right. I got sidetracked. I was just envisioning being all shiny. S- but tenants have rights, and some of that obviously just kind of health and safety. You've got to have smoke detectors in place. You have to have heat. You have to have windows that work and doors that work so that the home
Running
can be
water.
secured.
Yeah.
Yeah, all of those things. So the fact that the state does some regulation over property owners and housing providers, I think is right and just.
Yeah.
Um,
I do too.
and and then when we jump into the how much can you charge for rent, it becomes a little bit more cloudy. Um,
Hmm.
and that property owners in a capitalist environment have a right to make a return on their investment. And tenants, it's that they have to pay fair market value. But what the problem is that somebody might be in a rental with a fixed income, whether it's Social Security or the job that they have doesn't have the kind of increase in salary. We think about the minimum wage not being raised in however long, and that affects not just those at the bottom, but those just above and gradually on the way up.
Yeah.
So they might not be keeping pace, their income might not be keeping pace with inflation, as we've all felt this last year. And so where does that balance with a landlord's right to be able to raise rent to keep up with inflation? So all of these laws are trying to find some equilibrium and balance between these two different competing facts, the right of the landlord to make a or the property owner to
Mhm.
make a income off their investment and kind of some human rights and decencies for tenants.
We're kind of in a unique situation for seeing both sides of that. because we sell investment properties to our clients. They have some extra money. Real estate is a great way to invest that money. It's an appreciating asset. And so we encourage that with our clients. But we also have buyers who really want to buy their own home and are struggling to be able to afford it. The prices in California are really high and they've been out of reach for a lot of people for a long time. And so we see both sides of that. And that's not even talking about the huge homeless problem we have in California, especially in the Bay Area here.
Yeah.
It's people who don't have houses at all, or people who are living in RVs, and trying to find places to park them so that
Yeah.
they have some shelter. It's a very complicated problem.
Yeah. And you're referencing the working homeless. Like there are people who have jobs who are sober and clean, but just aren't making enough money to get into a house that they can afford, or
Yeah,
they've lost it and now they don't have enough for down payment to move in,
yeah,
or. And so there are
yeah,
people that are living in their cars and working jobs.
yeah,
It's really, they're on the fringe.
yeah,
Um, Maybe in a couple of weeks we might reference a couple organizations that we recommend you support that do work with housing and
yeah,
the underhoused or dehoused or whatever the political right term is.
yeah.
Um,
Let's do
but
that.
yeah, stay tuned to that. Um, so we
So
kind of
Prop 33.
Right. So we laid the groundwork of why there are rent control and why, to a certain extent, they might be a good idea. So Prop 33 is the latest version to try and adopt a couple of the state rules regarding um, the current rent control. You were the one that kind of nailed that down a little bit. Can you share those 3 points that you did earlier?
So Proposition 33 hopes to limit some of the guidelines that a bill called Costa-Hawkins put into place back in 1995. So it would make Costa-Hawkins made any housing built after 1995 exempt from local rent laws. It made units like single family homes and condominiums exempt from rent control. And it said that local rent control can only be enacted for existing tenants, not for new tenants. That allows a housing provider to raise the rent to fair market value once an old tenant moves out and a new tenant moves in. Proposition 33 wants to make changes to that law from 1995. One of the things that it would change is that single family homes and condominiums would no longer be exempt from rent control. It would also limit the state of California from um, enacting any local rent control laws into the future, which seems very far reaching
Mhm.
for a ballot measure. And then it would limit a landlord, sorry, it would limit a housing provider from raising the rent when an old tenant moves out and a new tenant moves in. In other words, rent control would carry over from an old tenant to a new tenant. Sometimes a person has been living, a renter has been living in a property for a long time. They've been a really good renter, and the housing provider doesn't want to raise the rent because they're a good tenant. They're taking good care of the property. They want to, help them out and keep them as a tenant. But when they move out, if they haven't been paying fair market value, it's a perfect opportunity to raise that rent. Proposition 33 would not allow that. Rent control would continue on to the new tenant. Does that make sense?
Well, the word you're saying makes a coherent sentence, but it doesn't make sense to have it limit future. So yes, I'm going to
It
partially
does
agree.
not. It
We're
does not.
working with a seller right now who has a duplex for sale, and there's the two tenants have both been in there about 20 years, and they're under rented partially because they haven't raised the rent every year. And in the properties in Alameda, and in Alameda, their rent control limits the rent control board specifies how much you can raise the rent each year. And
Mhm.
for about the last 5 or 6 years coming out of going through COVID to before that, it's been about 2.5% a year of raising of the rent. but market value is well above that. So a unit that might rent for 3,000 is only being rented for 2,000, and to not be able to recoup that suppresses the value of that home by not if it became vacant, to not be able to rent it at full market value just seems really not the right fair thing to do. It's one thing to hold it in place for the tenants that are in place,
Mhm.
but to not be able to readjust it when it came vacant seems a little onerous.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I agree. Um, and I think this proposition hopes to help solve the problem with not having enough homes.
Yeah.
And I think that what is going to happen is, if it passes, is that it disincentivizes housing providers from investing in properties and putting them on the market for rent. Because why would they do that if they know that somebody else is in control of how much they can charge for rent? Don't you agree?
Well, I think right. So the basic supply and demand is that, for ever and a day, there's not been enough homes for sale in California or places to rent. And
Yep.
that's what's driving up market value, not so much greedy landlords. It's what
Mhm.
the market will hold. And part of why the market holds it is that if you're, to look for something less expensive, you're having to move out to Stockton. Well, that's not a worthwhile commute for some people, depending on what their job is.
Right.
Um, and and so the by putting a restrictor on how much an investor might make from building new units and renting them out, it de-incentivizes them, like you said, from building new. And it's interesting, the city of Oakland, I've been part of some conversations with developers in Oakland, uh, people who are empathetic to the housing problem in Oakland and the homelessness. Oakland natives, people that have been involved in Oakland for a long time, not people that are throwing stones at Oakland. And there's plenty of opportunity for that.
Yeah.
And the city of Oakland's put such stringent rules around if you're going to build, like the project in question was a luxury condo tower downtown, that
Mhm.
if they wanted to do that, they had to build also low income housing, a certain number of low income housing. And on the surface, that doesn't seem like a horrible plan because you're getting to add all of these new housing units affecting the supply and demand ratio.
Mhm.
But the problem is the cost of building new low income housing isn't that much different than building the luxury ones.
Mhm.
Obviously, the finishes are different, but the safety of the structure and all the requirements of making it up to current codes, it doesn't really cost that much different. And so why would it's basically cutting the profit in half of what they want to do? And it's like, that's not enough money. If I can't make, I don't know what the actual numbers on the return are, but let's say if, I'm doing it because I think I'm going to make 10% return on my investment, but now I'm only making five.
Mhm.
Why would I take that risk in building something? I can make five in the stock market. I can make five someplace. That it de-incentivizes the investor from doing it. And so what happens is that no new construction is happening, and where we just exacerbate the supply and demand. And so there's places like Oakland that has significant housing shortages need to be a little bit more creative in how they're looking to solve it. Again, these are people that who are working on this development that are empathetic to the housing shortage and to homelessness and low income properties, but
Mhm.
it's just it they don't it's not it doesn't pencil out for them based on the restrictions.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you seen any of the commercials for Prop 33?
They drive me crazy. I have to turn them off. They're overwhelming.
Well, and like any advertising, you have to dig deeper than what they're presenting because they're only presenting their side of it. And one of the commercials is got this dirge of music that's playing in the background, and it's showing all these terrible things, people, homeless people, and people living in their cars, and saying people are leaving California in droves because they can't afford to live here. Yes, it's expensive to live here, probably one of the most expensive states in the union. And but our experience selling houses has not been that people are leaving California. We've had a few people relocate to go be closer to grandkids, mostly is
Mhm.
the trying to think if we sold anybody who was moving out of state for a job. Not lately. Mostly grandkids are the draw.
Yeah.
But we mostly have people coming in from outside of the state of California. So our advice, of course, is to look at those commercials and then do your research,
Yeah.
because they're telling you what their side of the story, right?
Yeah. One of the places that I often look for what I think is relatively neutral information is the California League of Women Voters, and
Mm,
they tend to bend left on some issues, but they will present the case fairly. And I think what was interesting on Prop 33, they were actually neutral on it,
mm, mm,
which was kind of surprising. Um, like we started out earlier, they see the value of like homelessness and housing issues is one of their core things that they do research on every cycle and just all the bills that are going through. So they're really up to date on this as an issue. And so they're generally, pro tenant in those sort of like housing right sort of way. So the fact that they're neutral on it just shows that some of the complexity of this issue about the fact that it could actually hurt the rental market, and the lower income or even entry level buyers,
yep,
not just the renters, because of the like we were just discussing, the kind of stifling of new development, which would provide additional housing, and then kind of perpetuate the problem. Um, so I mean, I think that it's a complex issue. Housing is a complex issue. We're balancing people's rights.
mm,
While there might be some room for some good controls on property housing providers, it just doesn't seem like this bill is the right one to pass. It seems like it's going to cause some more problems than it's actually solving. And one of the things that I don't know about you, but one of the things that's always confusing to me is you look and see who's supporting which side of the, who are the people for this and who are against it, and they have all these names that are kind of deceptive. But the guy who wrote the bill is they're sponsoring it. I don't know if he actually wrote it. Obviously, a lawyer probably did that, but he's like the AIDS found.
he wrote it and funded it.
Oh yeah,
Yes.
but he's the CEO of the AIDS Health Foundation
Yeah,
or
he's an
something,
AIDS activist.
which is amazing, right? Happy that I'm glad that he's out there doing that, but I don't understand the correlation between his core function and
Yeah.
this housing issue. And I just wonder whether somebody who might have been more attuned to the housing industry would have done a better job of crafting the rent control bill that would have been better, because this doesn't seem like it's a good choice.
No, it's funny because I always complain about people who write bills are not the people who are actually in the trenches doing the work and having the experiences of what it's like to, well, for us, for example, we had a client in Concord who they outgrew their house and wanted to buy something bigger, and they were in a kind of unique position of being able to keep both homes. And rent the old one out while they moved into the bigger one to accommodate their growing family. And they rented it for a year, and then Concord passed a rental law, rent restriction law. And they called us and they said, we want to list the house and sell it because we do not want to function under rent control. And so it was initially great that they were providing housing for people who couldn't afford to buy and needed to rent. And then a year later, because of this, rent restriction, they were like, sell it. It took a house off the market. And so, people who write laws and, initiate ballots and fund them need to maybe do a little more research and find out what it's really like out there.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
I, I don't know what
yeah,
his political, motivation is, but we live this, we experience it.
yeah, yeah. Well, I hope everybody out there looking does their own research. We hope you vote. Vote however you think is best for you.
Yep.
We've kind of tipped our hands about how we feel about this particular proposition. If you have questions about it, we'd love to talk about it. We were actually had a conversation with a client last night who apologized about this kind of detailed thing. And we're like, oh, we love talking about this. We were geeking out on it. We actually do love talking about all this kind of stuff, whether it's rent control or housing, whatever it is. So feel free to reach out to us. If you enjoyed this podcast episode, be sure to like and subscribe. And if you have any real estate housing needs, whether it's buying, selling, or renting, we'd be happy to help you. All right.
Yep. Yep.
See you guys next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.